Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We will be starting this webinar shortly. We're just waiting for few of our attendees to join. Thank you once again for joining today's webinar, and we welcome you all. Hello, and a very good evening, good morning, good day to everyone who has joined us today. We and I, on behalf of Geo Institute, would like to welcome you all to this masterclass. And before we deep dive into what we're going to do today, what we're going to learn today, I'd like to request our project director, Dr. Palak Sheth, to give his opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Good evening to all. On behalf of our founder, chairperson, Mrs. Ambani, and chairman, Mr. Mukesh Ambani, I extend very warm welcome to you for this masterclass on what great leaders do. Geo Institute is a multidisciplinary higher education institution set up as a philanthropic initiative by the Reliance Group with a pledge from Mr. and Mrs. Ambani. The institute is dedicated to the pursuit of excellence by bringing together global scholars and thought leaders and providing an enriching student experience through a world-class education and culture of research and innovation. Our founders' firm belief in the power of youth to transform India has been an instrumental in setting up Geo Institute. They also believe knowledge is the foundation of generating human capital that will contribute to innovation, new ideas, and creativity. Geo Institute currently offers four full-time residential programs called Postgraduate Program in Artificial Intelligence, Postgraduate Program in Digital Media and Marketing Communication, Postgraduate Program in Sports Management, and Postgraduate Program in Journalism. We are fortunate today to have Ms. Bambi with us to deliver our second masterclass on what great leaders do. By the end of this masterclass, you will be gaining a valuable insight and practical skill and leadership trait for leading the school to promote the excellence. And just to give you a broad perspective, that with the vision of our chairperson and Isha Ben, the Geo Institute has taken this recent initiative for developing a teachers training initiative. And to strengthen this initiative and contributing towards education ecosystem of India, this master series are being run, which will be followed by launching the formal training program for the principals and teachers training. With this, I once again welcome you all to this masterclass and look forward to hosting you at our campus in Ulve, Navi Mumbai. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for those lovely remarks. And I once again would like to thank Ms. Bambi and Mr. Craig for joining us today for this masterclass on what leaders should do and not do. So before we, I hand over the forum to Ms. Bambi for a masterclass, I'd like to talk a little bit more about Geo Institute and what we're doing here at the Institute. Dr. Sheth very briefly mentioned about the 4 programs that we have launched and about the larger vision of our founders, both Mr. and Mrs. Ambani. So as he was mentioning, that Geo Institute is founded on the personal pledge of our founders, Mr. and Mrs. Ambani, who both believe in the power of education and how it can transform the youth. And with their vision came our vision, which is to be an exemplary Indian academic institution with global repute. We want to build a vibrant ecosystem for research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. We want to be India's testbed for frontier research, prepare next generation of leaders, significantly contribute to the advancement of Indian society, and our motto is to provide a lifelong learning experience. We have a governing council, which is led by our founder, Mrs. Ambani, our Chancellor, Dr. Mashelkar, our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Deepak Jain, Shri Akash Ambani, Shri Anant Ambani, and Srimati Isha Ambani. Other members of the council are Dr. Bimal Patel, Shri Vikram Singh Mehta, Shri Jalaj Dani, and Shri R. Venkatraman. We also have Dr. Pradeep Khosla as a part of our governing council. In addition to our governing council, we also have a global advisory council. All the 4 names that you see on your screen are institution builders, research scholars. Dr. Shamu has been associated with Caltech, KAUST, and Georgia Tech. Dr. Sachs, director at Center of Sustainable Development of Colombia. Dr. Suresh, he just completed his tenure as the president of NTU Singapore, and he was the former president of CMU. And Dr. Levin, he's the longest standing president of any Ivy League, and he was associated with Yale. We spoke about our Chancellor, Dr. R. Mashelkar, who has received the highest Indian civilian awards, which is the Padma Vibhushan and Padma Bhushan, and he was the former Director General of CSIR. Dr. Deepak Jain, Vice Chancellor, former Dean of Kellogg and INSEAD, and Dr. Gurusamy Ravichandran is the Provost of Geo Institute. Before this, he was associated with Caltech for over 30 years, and you just heard our Project Director, Dr. Palak Sheth. In addition to this, we also have academic advisors. The 4 courses that we have launched, every course has a mentor associated with it. For our Artificial Intelligence and Data Science program, we have Dr. Shailesh Kumar, who's the Chief Data Scientist of Reliance, and Dr. Larry Birnbaum, who's the Professor of Computer Science at Northwestern University. The mentor for our Digital Media Marketing and Communications program is Dr. Frank Mullen, who is the Associate Dean of Research at Northwestern. For our sports management program, the mentor is Dr. William Sutton, who's the Professor and Director Emeritus at the University of South Florida. And the journalism program, our mentor is Dr. Harsh Taneja, who is the Associate Professor at Urbana-Champaign, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. In addition to this, Geo Institute has formed a Geo Institute digital library, which we are developing in close consultation with Stanford, and Dr. Michael Keller from Stanford is helping us develop this library. Geo Institute already has a 15-year strategic plan in place. By the end of 15 years, we will have these schools a 10:1 faculty to student to faculty ratio. We're currently in our campus in Ulve, but work for our upcoming campus, which is going to be built on a 400-acre of land in Navi Mumbai, is already underway. After 15 years, we aim to have around 10,000 students, 15,000 international students, undergraduate programs, postgraduate programs, and executive education programs. We have divided our 15 years into 3 phases. We're currently in our startup phase, where we're focusing on launching postgraduate level programs. The next phase, which is the growth phase, will focus on expanding these disciplines into full-fledged schools. And finally, in the maturity phase, we will focus on launching the remaining schools specialized in interdisciplinary academic programs. We spoke about the 2 campuses. We're currently in our Ulve campus, and we're working on our upcoming campus in Dronagiri. This is just a snapshot of how our upcoming campus is going to look like. Before we move ahead, I'd just like to show a few glimpses of how our campus in Ulve looks like. There are 2 buildings, identical twin buildings. One is the academic and one is the residential block. We have an academic lawn, classrooms, digital media lab, production control room, computer centers, an AR/VR lab, a library, a silent reading space, 2 multi-purpose halls, a high-performance athletic center, sports and recreational facilities, tennis court, basketball court, an outdoor cafe, faculty offices, conference rooms, cafeteria, executive dining areas, a few glimpses of a residential block, student residences. Every floor has a lot of discussion rooms, meeting rooms, collaborative rooms, common spaces, breakout spaces. We also have the visiting faculty suite in our residential block. Talking a little bit more about the academic philosophy of Geo Institute. Initially, we have focused on launching postgraduate programs, and all the 4 programs that we have launched are new age programs that are in line with the current industry trends and academic trends. These programs are also in line with the Reliance Group's strengths and focus areas, and we have developed these programs with the help of eminent global advisors. So in our first year, we launched with 2 programs, which is artificial intelligence and data science and digital media and marketing communications. This year, we've launched 2 new programs in journalism and sports management. And in the coming years, we will be launching programs in new energy, new materials, life sciences, and fintech. Talking a little bit about our artificial intelligence and data science program, we have 60 students in this cohort. These are the kind of faculty and advisors that are teaching this program here at Geo Institute. Our class profile looks like this. We have 60 students, 25% female, 75% male, average work ex of 4 years, average age around 26. They represent 16 Indian states and 1 country outside of India. Similarly, for our digital media and marketing communications program, these are the kind of faculties from all across the world, both from industry and academia, that have come and taught this course. Again, we have 60 students, 28% female, 72% male, average work ex of 4 years, average age around 25.1. They represent 15 Indian states and 3 countries outside of India. The 2 new programs that we're launching this year are sports management and journalism. This is just a snapshot of the curriculum that we will be teaching in our sports management program. And if you notice that, sports is something that kind of affects all functional domains. So we have courses such as sport finance, legal issues, trends, electives such as venue management, and so on. These are just a broad list of faculty and advisors that will be coming to teach our sports management program. Moving to our journalism program, again, a very evolving sector. These are the kind of core and foundation courses that we will be teaching. Some of them include media law and ethics, introduction to reporting and writing, interviewing skills, and so on. And few elective courses are advanced data journalism, immersive journalism, and so on. These are our faculties who will be coming and teaching our journalism program. In addition to our core curriculum, we also have the holistic learning modules. They are basically 21st century life skills, which are design thinking, digital thinking, research thinking, and so on. Geo Institute is a research-focused institute, and from day one, we stand by it. And one of our full-time faculty has already started his research in the field of AI and computer vision. And they have already published a couple of papers in international journals. And the goal of this particular research is to automate the traditional tasks that are performed by clinicians. We briefly spoke about Geo Institute Digital Library. It's a hybrid library, a physical and a digital library, which has a lot of softwares that have been, and a lot of databases that we've already kind of onboarded, and we now have around 65 million company profiles, 5 million plus theses, 4 lakh plus books, 2 million plus working papers, and so on. This is just a list of the kind of databases that we've onboarded in our Geo Institute Digital Library. This was just a small glimpse of what we're doing here at Geo Institute, and now I'd like to invite Craig to talk a little bit about what we can expect out of this masterclass, and also introduce Ms. Bambi. Over to you, Craig.
Thank you, Ritu. Welcome, everyone. It's so good. I'm in the United States right now. It's 5:30 in the morning where I am. The sun hasn't risen, but you in India, it's coming to the end of the day. I'm super excited to introduce Ms. Bambi Betts to you today. So to set the context, in 1995, that's almost 25 years ago, probably before some of you were even born, I was a 30-year-old teacher in Brazil, at an American school in Brazil. And I had aspirations that one day I wanted to be a principal or even a head of a school. That was my aspiration. So I scheduled a meeting with my head of school at the time. His name was Mr. David Tully. And I asked him, I said, David, if I want to be a successful school principal and maybe someday a head of school, what should I do today to prepare? And he said, without hesitation, Craig, you should attend the Principals Training Center in Miami this June and work with Bambi Betts. I had never heard her name before. He said it's a program started by Bambi, and he said, and I quote, "She's a brilliant teacher, an inspirational leader, and a treasure as a resource." And so I did. I went to Miami, and David was right. Today, 30 years later, I attribute much of my success in educational leadership to what I learned during my PTC summer courses, and more importantly, to the network of friends and colleagues that I built through the PTC, the Principal Training Center. Bambi Betts is indeed brilliant, inspirational, and a resource. And we are thrilled at the Geo Institute and privileged to have her with us today. Bambi founded the Principal Training Center, a not-for-profit organization, in 1989. The PTC offers professional growth and development for principals, teachers, counselors, teacher leaders, like I was 30 years ago, and also governance for trustees and boards. I'll talk more about the PTC and how aspiring educational leaders in India and Southeast Asia can now access this program in person, starting this summer. Very exciting. I'll talk more about that at the end. Prior to Bambi working with the PTC, she served as an international school principal and a head of school in various countries. She really knows the craft. She knows what it takes at a practical level to lead school. And she's also currently a member of 3 international school boards. She is the leading consultant on a wide range of topics in international schools, and she conducts on-site training modules related to effective schools. She's written numerous articles on practical ways to improve schools, and she authors a regular column on everything related to education. Ms. Betts knows education and leadership at a very deep level, and we are super grateful and excited to have her with us here today, and to have her and her program, the PTC, committed to coming to India to offer the course to us that live in India and Southeast Asia. Thank you for being here, Bambi, and now over to you.
Well, thank you, Craig, for that overwhelming introduction. And I am really thrilled to be here with all of you. And I want to get us started because I know that we're on a timeline, and time is one commodity that we cannot recreate. So let me share my screen and we will move ahead. Team, are we set?
Yes.
All good. Okay. So again, welcome to all of you. And again, thank you, Craig. I'm honored really to be part of this very significant and transformational, we hope, work that Geo is doing. Kind of overwhelming and in a wonderful way to hear, Ritu, to hear what's happening and look at the vision that's out in front of all of us. So thank you again for including me in this amazing effort that you are all making. So let's get started. Want you, all of you who are on with us today, to get ready to learn. It's the first thing we always do when we're in a learning organization. Few things to get yourself ready. First, do keep some notes. There are going to be lots of things that you'll wish that you had a little booklet or someplace, however you keep those notes. Please do keep making connections to your own practice. If you're not a practicing leader yet, you're an aspiring leader, be thinking about how this might make a difference as you move forward. Do put questions in the chat. I think that's coming a little bit later on, but we will have a chance to answer questions, etc. So please do that. Also, be thinking about at least one action when this class is done. One of the things that characterizes effective professional learning is that you are contextualizing it to your own situation or your potential future needs. So those are some things for you to get ready. I'm not going to do all the work here. You are needing to be active participants. And even though we can't really engage with each other in the ways that we might, were we in a room together or even on a different type of Zoom call, participate. And then do not try to do other things while you're participating. Towards the end of our session today, I'll be able to tell you even more why that's important. And also, I'm sorry, my things are not working properly here. All right. Okay. So as you are here at this event today, you're very likely aware that things are brewing in India, that there's a new vision that's been laid out by the National Education Plan 2020. And this is just a quote from the beginning of that plan, that this aim is for India to have this education system within the next less than 20 years. And look at the organizers here, second to none, equitable access to the highest quality education for all learners, whoever they are. So that's a pretty high bar. It really raises the bar on the amount and type of learning that students are going to have access to over these next 10 to 20 years. And hopefully, like many of us around the world who work in international schools and national schools around the world, you're going to get a sense of urgency about this. It's time. We need to move forward. And so let's take a look at what we can do together to start moving that forward. So what's leadership got to do with it? Can leaders make significant contributions to that vision? Well, guess what? The news is good. Yes, we can. Both formal research as well as experienced practitioners from around the world have both come to this same conclusion. The formal research, I won't share all of the formal places that you might look today. That might be something that we can follow up with. But places like Wallace Foundation, OECD, many universities, many formal research efforts have been made to try and determine whether or not the school leadership can have a significant impact on the learning of the kids. And we also know from just experienced practitioners from around the world, and our work in the Principals Training Center is very much based in sort of the practical, what's actually working. And both from the formal research as well as from the practitioners that we informally learn from, we do learn that highly skilled, enlightened leaders are essential to an effective school. You know, there's never, in any of these, both informal and formal research pieces, there's never been an example of a school where students were achieving what we had intended them to achieve that didn't have strong, effective leadership. No cases of it. There were just no cases. The other thing that we've learned from the research, we didn't really realize this. Traditionally, we thought that we understood that until very recently, we tended to measure the effectiveness of leaders through things like whether or not there was a positive climate or culture in the school, or whether things were running smoothly, or whether parents, teachers, kids, and staff were satisfied with their experiences at the school. And those things continue to be essential. But the thing that's really come into focus for us over the last several years is this notion of accountability to learning. This has been taking a back seat. Can leaders actually have an impact on the student learning itself? And of course, we can't do it directly. We do it indirectly. But the good news is that, yes, leaders can and do impact student learning. So it's on that premise that we are going to kind of move forward here over the next several minutes. We have about 35 or 40 minutes. I hope somebody there is timekeeping. Are you? Yes, you guys are timekeeping for me so that I can stay focused on the learning, and we'll try to do. We're going to do sort of speed dating here. You know, what can we learn from great school leaders in 35 or 40 minutes? And what do they do that positively impacts learning? I want you to keep that notion going. There are many things that you can do, but we're looking for those that we know from the research and from empirical evidence from practitioners that will positively impact learning. And then what are some of the things that they intentionally not do? For those of you who like to know where we're headed, hopefully we will have the opportunity to visit 5 very practical strategies that we've learned from these 2 sources of research, right? So as we begin to explore these 5, I think it's worth pointing out that in all of the different places that the research is being done, this idea emerged that before you can think about what you're going to do and don't do, and which one of the do's and don'ts are going to be effective for you as you either become a leader or go forward in your practice as an already practicing leader, is that the way that you see schooling and learning kind of sets this framework for both your goals and for whatever do's and don'ts it is that you're going to come up with. So it's just interesting that there are sort of three mindsets going that we saw emerging each time we would start to ask people about, well, what do you do and what don't you do? So the first mindset is what we call sort of keeping the status quo. Here, people who tend to approach their schooling and learning, it's like this, that the basic features of schools will continue to exist. So in this mindset, we're going to have a continuation of the sense that there's a teacher in a classroom, there's a classroom itself or classrooms, and this is rooted in a sense that essentially the model of kids learning of the same age, learning together in similar spaces, a teacher, a group of kids, that this is rooted in the sense that this model is, there's some good things about it. And then the resources are directed at maintaining what works in that current system. This doesn't mean that this mindset doesn't also capture the idea that there could be other things that we need to do outside of this model. But overall, essentially, the model is set. If you read through carefully the NEP, the plan 2020, not quite sure that this is the mindset with which they wrote it. Don't know how familiar all of you are with that, but this is something that you'll want to take a close look at if you are an aspiring or practicing leader. So that's mindset number one. You can see how that mindset is going to put a frame around the types of do's and don'ts that you will engage in. The second mindset, we called it reschooling. And here we do retain the notion of the school, because remember, a school is just the vehicle. It is a vehicle for education. We know there are many, many others. But in reschooling, the mindset is, yes, we're going to have this place called school, and that place might extend beyond that actual place, but we're going to recreate it around a more contemporary knowledge or understanding particularly about how people learn. You've heard this, I'm sure, hundreds of times, that the model that we are using in the place called school currently is still very attached to some older thinking about how individuals learn, and particularly children and young people learn. So reschooling means that your frame is, yes, there'll be school. Within that, there are many things that we are probably going to need to be ready to move along on. And then the third mindset, we call it deschooling. I'm not sure that's exactly a word, but we're turning it into one. And in this mindset, kind of questions the whole notion of whether we should start by saying what makes an effective school versus what makes effective learning. So the focus is not on learning rather than schooling. And that's you might say, well, I've always thought about learning. Of course, that's the purpose of a school, is to learn. Here, this mindset does that first, rather than even imagining that there is a school. We're not blowing it up, but we are realizing that in this mindset that let's just put that aside for the moment and think about whether or not starting with learning would give us a different result than starting with schooling. This mindset includes ideas like school as a place might cease to exist, or it would become one of several alternative models for formal learning. We all talk about how, yes, a lot of learning happens outside of school. We're talking about something beyond that school might no longer be the main place where we deliver formal learning, where we've determined what kids need to learn and some of the ways that they're going to learn it. That valued learning might be determined by choices and demands of, if you will, the market rather than tradition. So 3 different mindsets, which you want to be thinking about. What's the mindset, if you're in a current school, what's the mindset do you think at your school? And what is your own mindset? One of the reasons that we've come together today, and in fact, are going forward with this new set of programs to help the school leaders become even better school leaders, is to shift this mindset. So are you, and just participate here. Where are you and where is your school? Are you more of a status quo mindset where we're going to maintain, promote schools we know it, reschooler, keep the school, but reconstruct around new knowledge? Or are you in this sort of deschooling camp? We don't like to categorize people, but this is a way for you to be thinking about how you are going to be approaching. I'm going to be sharing with you now a bunch of 5 do's and don'ts, but your mindset is going to immediately go to, oh no, that will never work in my school. If you are thinking about schooling versus learning, your mindset might, if you are thinking about reschooling, maybe, oh, I do need to open my mind a little bit to the possibility that just because I haven't experienced it, it might work, and so forth. So let's move ahead. I'm going to just pause for about 10 seconds for you to think about those 2 ideas. What's your mindset? What's your school's mindset? And you might jot those down wherever it is that you are keeping track of your thoughts here today. This is where it would be really useful to be in a space with you, or at least on an interactive chat, but we know that's not possible. Onward. So a reminder, not that any of us need reminding, that the overarching goals of school are, we think, as we read over the missions and vision statements of schools in many countries around the world, are pretty much, we have these in common. And they are to ensure that each child, number 1, develops their own individual potential so that they can flourish in the world. And I like the word flourish. I think we have many words when we try to describe the goal of sort of drawing out the potential of each individual, but the idea that they individually can flourish. And of course, the second goal is also to contribute positively to society, to carry forward this ever advancing civilization. So this is a pretty large mindset, or set of goals that we are all, whatever kind of school we're in, that we're searching for. With that as the background, a number 1 practice that we see in schools where we have effective leadership that's impacting learning is this. We see our job as leaders to create a holistic system, and the word system is critical here, because what's different when you're in a single classroom versus when you are looking at the whole organization is that we have to look at all the moving parts of that system and then find ways to translate these into an hour by hour, day by day, student by student learning plan. So here's one way that some people do this. There are 5 questions at the heart of our system being the system of learning that we're going to put together and currently call school. And this practice suggests that you do everything around these 5 questions. The 5 questions will be very familiar to you, but we're going to suggest that you use these 5 questions as sort of the heart of the matter in using them in your planning for everything that you do. The first question that we have an obligation to is, what do we intend our students to know, understand, be able to do, and increasingly be like? The dispositions, the things that dispose learners to learn, the dispositions that cause us to be able to work with others in order to contribute to society, etc. Increasingly in schools, you will probably have experienced that are starting to be almost as important in the place called school as the understandings and the skills, etc. So who gets to decide what's worth learning. And how do we capture that? How do we arrive at it? In India, you have national curriculum, but you also have curriculum choices. In the NEP, in the plan, if you read through carefully, you'll see that there's quite a lot in there that already prescribes what is some of the content, what are some of the things that learners are going to need to have access to. So question number one, what's worth learning and who gets to decide starts to be the heart of our planning system. The second question we have to ask is how are we going to know that they've learned? The system needs to systematically approach this. It's not okay to bring a kid into a school and say, this is what we want you to learn, but then not periodically, consistently check whether or not they're learning it. The third question in the system is how do we teach effectively to ensure that students are learning? And of course, that's the heart of the matter of what kids are going to be spending their time on all day and how do teachers and leaders direct that. And how much of that is prescribed and how much of that is, do teachers have agency to do? So you can start to see all the components that we would talk about in a week-long course, where today we just want to tweak your interest in the idea that these 5 questions at the heart of our system are one of the key actions that leaders will take. The fourth question is, what do we do when students are not learning? Is it okay that 20% of our kids are not achieving the learning outcomes? You know, learning is not a competition. If it's about drawing out the potential of each student and giving them access, as NEP has said, to the very best that we know about teaching and learning and to the very best content, etc., then what do we do? And what is the system going to look like? And then the last question that sometimes hasn't occurred, and this might be the one that you'll want to make a note of and sort of highlight in your notes, is what do we do when students have already learned or they reach mastery before we expected them to? You know, as you know, our schools still in most places around the world are set up around seat time. You're going to spend X amount of time in this course called whatever it's called, and everybody is going to spend the same amount of time in that same space. Well, what if I already knew coming in half the things that you intended to teach me? Or what if I already arrived at those learnings in the first 3 weeks? And what am I going to do for the rest of the term? So these 5 questions are at the heart, at the very, very heart of our system. Great school leaders, some of the things that they do with this notion are that they establish this as a definition. So they put it out there as the definition of what is the work of the entire school. Everybody from the finance leaders to the principals, to the head of school, to the people who are support staff, to the teachers, to everybody, that we establish this as a concrete and actionable definition. So when people say, what do you do here? We say, these are the 5 things that we do here. This is the system, right? We use it to write job descriptions. We use it to frame discussions. We use it to do audits of our curriculum. We use it to plan curriculum. So pretty much everything. What don't we do is assume that what great leaders don't do is that they don't assume that every teacher in their school shares this definition and knows their specific part in it. So you can see there's a lot looming around there. And again, were we in a longer session here, these are the kinds of things that we hope you're going to get excited about, that will lead you to think about joining us in future courses where we really dig into the specific actions and what this looks like on a kind of a moment by moment basis. So that's our number 1 action. Okay, so little work for you. Have a look at this list. There's 12 things here. Which one of these do you think has the most impact on learning? These are all things that over the decades we have been told may or may not have an impact on the learning of the kids. So I'm going to give you just about 30 seconds to read over that list and decide which one you think has the most impact on learning. They all have some. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to look at those. You know, you're all educators of some type. You know that think time is really critical, and it's one of the things that we sometimes rush. I'm trying not to do that. Excellent. All right. So, and the answer is the quality of teaching or teacher performance, which was number 8 on our list. There is hands down, we know that the quality of teaching or what teachers do, the way they teach, is the number 1 influence on student learning. The others are all important and the others will have an impact, but the number 1 thing is the quality of teaching. So what do great school leaders do then to ensure the quality teaching for all students? So here's where we need the week. And we're going to try to boil this down to just a handful of things, again, to kind of tweak your interest in moving forward. But if you didn't do anything else as a school leader, this is the thing where you would want to put all of your resources. So our second thing here, our second leadership do's and don'ts are around this idea that knowing that teacher quality is critical, what do great leaders do? One of the things that they do is embrace this notion that there are actually standards of practice for teachers. Maybe you're already doing that. Maybe that's already something that you use that comes from your Ministry of Education. But we'd like to reiterate that you really, if you don't have a shared understanding of what it means to be an effective teacher, then it's going to be very difficult to come to any conclusion of which teachers practices are making a difference, etc. So one of the things that is strongly recommended is that you embrace these standards of practice for teachers and that you use them as a starting point for every single thing that you do, for every conversation, when you're walking through a classroom, when you're recruiting, when you're in your appraisal scheme, when you're coaching teachers. It's a very different thing to be able to say, let's say an incident has taken place. You're having a conversation with the teacher. It's a very different conversation to say, let's talk about that incident that just happened yesterday, versus I'd like to have a little conversation with you about standard 2. You see how that makes us much more professional and much more likely to have a shared starting point. There is a set of national professional standards for teachers that's being worked on in India. That's my understanding. I've sent these links so that, I don't know, perhaps we can put those in the chat. I sent them earlier in an email, and I'm not going to try to put them through here because I know that things move around when you start clicking on things on your slides. So that's an interesting thing to follow up on. Maybe those already exist in some form, but as part of NEP 2020, the National Professional Standards are being worked on, and there is a draft. Also, we can provide you with a link to a similar set of standards that are being used for international teachers around the world that have been jointly put together by some of the James Strong, other researchers who are out there who are helping us understand what are the most essential things that the teachers do. So part 1 of the do is, embrace a rigorous set of standards and don't leave home without it. Essentially, don't attempt any program of teacher growth, appraisal, or anything else without them. If you do not have standards for teachers, you are going to be missing probably one of the most key things in the entirety of the set of things that are available to you to be an effective leader. All right. In addition, because this is so important, it gets 2 screens, knowing that teacher quality is critical. Additional things beyond the standards that great school leaders do. They will spend most of their time and resources on what we call the high leverage instructional activities. So things like individualized instruction and coaching, and I highlight feedback. It really doesn't help unless I get feedback on how I'm doing. Teachers want feedback. They want more feedback than they're getting, than we hear from people around the world. So you as an instructional leader will be spending most of your time doing things like this. Classroom visits, looking for learning and making the connection to what is the thing that the teacher just did. You will make sure that there's a robust growth and appraisal process. Maybe in India, it will be part of this plan that, and I think it is already, it's already referred to. There is a rigorous appraisal process, but make sure that that's tied to those standards where you have that shared understanding of what it means to be an effective teacher. And then using learning evidence or learning data as part of the appraisal process. This is pretty controversial, but really, you know, how are we going to determine whether a teacher is an effective teacher? We can't only look at the inputs. We can't just say, did they say all the right things? Did they do all the right things? In the end, we have to look at what the quality and type and amount of learning that kids did under their charge. This is scary for people. And in the courses, if you join us, we spend lots of time on this idea that it's okay, not only okay, but essential that we use learning evidence as one of the key sources to determining whether teachers are being effective. And then finally, providing targeted, strategic professional learning, not just coming to a 35-minute webinar, but actually digging in. What does this teacher need to help them grow and have more impact on learning, on the learning of their kids? And then don't ever allow any student to endure a mediocre or poor teacher. Set that bar really high. We know it's hard. We know it's challenging. That's the job. Do not allow any student to endure. And again, in the longer courses, you get, what is it? How do we make that happen? For now, just keep it in mind. This is a question of ethics. It's unethical to allow any student to have to endure a poor or mediocre teacher. And your school, unfortunately, will be defined by your least effective teacher. That's the standard that you accept. So you can see here that this number 2 set of do's and don'ts kind of looms large in the set of the 5 that we're going to take a look at today. Right. The third one has to do with the curriculum. And the curriculum, I like to present the idea that the curriculum is the contract between the school and the parents and their children. What's in a contract? A contract says, I'm going to do some things and you're going to do some things. The parents and the kids say, I'm going to give you my most precious thing in life. Here is my child, over to you. What are we agreeing to? What are we guaranteeing in that contract? Do we guarantee learning? Most schools say no, we do not guarantee learning, but what we can guarantee is access, equitable access to what kids are going to learn, how they will learn, and whether they are learning. That's pretty much what we can put forward in that contract. So the curriculum work in a leadership role is central. It's where we bring those 5 questions that we talked about earlier to bear here. So keeping this notion of the curriculum as a contract, and there are promises made in the contract, we find all great school leaders doing. They approach it as a contract, and that they have promises to keep in that contract. So how are you going to ensure that equity? Here's some thoughts, all right? Interestingly, that some extensive research has been done in schools in various places. You know, not every country funds educational research. I was very excited to see all the research that projects that GEO is involved in other fields, and hopefully this will eventually extend also into this field of teaching, learning, and leading. But here's an example of researchers going into a school and asking teachers these questions. What's in the written curriculum? What are you required to teach? What's written down? And again, it looks like in India that you have quite a few things, particularly on Indian culture and history and understandings that are required in the curriculum. And if you do an external curriculum, Cambridge or something, there's things that you're given. So, okay, here's the established written curriculum. Are you aware of it, and what is it? All right. What actually gets taught? So teachers are asked, well, of that curriculum, are you teaching the whole thing, or what's going on here? Are you teaching everything, or are you teaching only some of it? And the third question is, what are you actually assessing? So they go into the school and ask, what's in the written curriculum? What are you, individual teacher, teaching out of that curriculum? And what are you, individual teacher, assessing? We're not talking about external assessment here. Now stay with me here, because this was not an easy one to put together. So let's just take a look, and want you to do some thinking about this, all right? So this is what they found. They found more or less this relationship. This is not good. If any of you are old enough to remember, we learned set theory. This is, the overlapping of where these things come together. So let's take a look at this piece right here. What is that? What is that? I wish we were in a room together and you would shout out what you think it is. So what is that piece of it? This is the piece of things this is what tells us that we wrote it down. So we intended to teach it. Spent lots of time, wrote a curriculum, we intended to teach it, but we didn't teach it and we didn't assess it. And the question that leaders ask themselves is this okay? Is it okay to have things in the written curriculum that nobody is teaching, or few people are teaching? Is that okay? This is a leadership question. What about this piece? What does that represent? I'll give you a moment. What does this piece here represent? Hopefully you came up with, this represents the set of things that we didn't intend to teach, but we did teach, but we didn't assess. We ask you the question again, is this okay in your school? Is it okay to teach things that are not in the written curriculum? Many will say something like this. Yes, this is the teachable moment. We could not think of everything. And so, yes, there's things that we need to be able to teach outside of the written curriculum. Is that okay in your school? And the last piece, what's that? What does that represent? It's useful if you are trying to, we think many of you are on your own in a space, say it out loud. What does it mean? So we didn't intend to teach it, it wasn't in the written curriculum. We didn't teach it, but we assessed it. Is this okay in your school? This one has a right answer. This is not okay. This is not okay. Leaders need to have answers to all of these questions. And they also need to have a definition of what is the ideal relationship for the impact on learning. I'm hoping that some of you have a pen and a pencil or something that you can write with, and you're starting to draw, what would this Venn diagram look like to represent the ideal relationship for the impact on learning? So what do great school leaders do related to this notion of the curriculum? They ensure that teachers have firm answers to these questions. You cannot guarantee equitable access to the curriculum unless every teacher has the same answer to these 4 questions. 1, do I teach everything in the written curriculum? Autonomy sometimes, or agency, means, oh, I don't really feel like I want to teach that unit, so I won't. Is that okay in your school? Is it okay to teach things that are not in the curriculum? In the state of Florida that I'm in right now, there are a whole bunch of things that teachers very recently have been told they are not allowed to teach. Is that happening in India? Are there guidelines on that? Do you have autonomy to make up your own mind about that as a school leader? Do I assess everything in the written curriculum? The assessment question is the most controversial, the one where you will spend probably most of your energy gritting your teeth and trying to figure out a way forward. You'll have many, many teachers who will say, unless you tell them that, yes, you do need to assess everything in the curriculum, that there are some things that are more important in the curriculum than others. So critical as a leader, ensure that every teacher has the same answer to the question in your school. And then finally, is it okay to assess things that are not in the curriculum? That is not okay. And some of the don'ts, or well, the main don't is, don't let anybody start teaching without knowing these answers. So when you bring a new teacher in, or even the existing teachers that are in your school, make sure that there are clear answers to these 4 questions, and that everybody's on the same page with it, and that you have created some tools that teachers can work with. Again, in the larger, longer courses, there's another 10 questions that we would put on this list. Everybody okay? I wish I could see your thumbs up. Hope you're learning. Check in with yourself. Check your notes. We've done 3. Moving on. Great school leaders know that there's really only one reason why something would need to change in a school. We don't do change for change's sake. We don't go in and say, we're just going to start moving things around. This is a system. In a great school, and with great school leaders, we know that there's only this one reason, that we are not seeing the amount and type of learning that we expect from our program. All improvement change needs to begin with, are we getting the learning that we intended to get? And with that, using the 5 questions, which was strategy number 1, at the heart of it. So if you're making change, trying to do something differently in a school, rethink it, back up. Have we looked at why we are doing that change? Or are we doing that change because everybody else is doing it? Here's an example of what great school leaders do to make sure that they have a way that honors this notion of always looking at learning first. So this model asks you to first analyze the situation, and don't spend too much time doing it, because it may take you 3 years otherwise. But you start always with what learning for what students is at stake. Someone brings a problem to the table, someone brings an idea to the table. You start always by saying, what learning for what students is at stake? What's the problem? And then how do we know it's a problem? Again, when we're teaching this in full, give you lots of tools, lots of examples, lots of scenarios. The second part of this little system says, what do we need to deconstruct, reconstruct, or construct to make it better, so that more kids will learn more and better? The fourth part of it is, how are we going to get the new practice in place? And the fourth part is, how are we going to monitor it? Many times we see that we start doing something, we have a plan, but we fail to build in, how are we going to know that it's working? What are the criteria going to be for us to determine that, yes, in fact, it is working? So this is just one example. It's a model that we use in the PTC. We call it ADMI. Doesn't come up to be an acronym, but there are many others. This one focuses you on starting with what learning for what kids. So we put it out there for you as an example of a systematic way of improving. Some of the more practical things, Start all planning conversations with what learning for what students is at stake. If we don't have this meeting today, what learning is at stake? It's a very interesting way that starts a conversation in a very different direction than saying, we have a problem. So a real practical tool that many leaders agree changes the mindset over to learning away from schooling. A really small one, but a big one in many ways. Many of us have learned to use the word improvement in place of the word change. Change has connotations for people. It conjures up resistance, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's a small thing to do. We don't want to do change for change's sake. So any change we're going to make, hopefully, will be an improvement. So start thinking about using that. And then again, use a simple planning sequence. Don't get too overly complicated. And we've shared one with you here. Don't make changes without sufficient learning evidence to support it. Go back to the learning, what learning is not happening that should be, and don't make changes just to make your mark. All too often, school leaders think, I've got to come in here and show that I know what I'm doing. So I'm just going to start shaking things up and moving things around. That's only warranted if you've done part one, which is to make sure that you have the learning evidence to support that there's a need for that change. Okay, and for our fifth, this one's going to take us a little bit of time, but I think it's really worth it. So I'd like you to take a look at these 8 statements and just record your answer. Nobody's looking. No one's going to write down whether you're right or wrong, but look at each of these statements and decide whether, from what you understand about learning, each is a truth or a myth. So I am going to give you like a full minute or so to do this, because it's kind of critical to see where your own thinking is on this. So which of these are true? Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to read those, maybe take a screenshot so you can have them by your side. I think it's worth spending just maybe 2 minutes on a couple of examples of a couple of these, and then we will come back to them, and hopefully you want the answers, and I will make the point of why this is important. All right, so we'll do a couple of examples of 1 or 2 of these. Okay, so we're gonna, the first one, and do this with me, we're gonna do it together, nobody's in the room with you, all right? So we're gonna say the first 12 letters of the alphabet in English together, right? So come with me, here we go. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M. I'm sure you did that really well. Now let's count out loud together, 1 to 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now we're going to do them simultaneously. You do that on your own. We're going to do 1A, etc. I'm not going to do it. You do it for yourself. 1A, 2B, etc. So what do you notice? No question at all that you could say the first 12 letters of the alphabet. Congratulations. No question at all that you could do 1 to 12. No question at all. When you try doing them at the same time, doesn't work out so well. And most of you probably got up to around number 7, 8, and then you start losing it. So what learning principle is at play here? It's this one, that the brain actually can pay attention to only one thing at a time. It seems like we are multitasking, but actually the brain only can pay attention to one thing at a time. We have many, many, many examples of this, and this is just a tiny one. I wish we had time to do 7 or 8 more. Okay, one more exercise on a different learning principle. See if you can complete this on your own. Again, I'm going to give you just about a moment here. You can see that there's some blanks here with the starting letters before the blank. So here we have anyone interested in some word that starts with TE. Okay. So I'm going to guess that most of you put something related to teaching, to schooling, to parents. That's going to be my guess. But here's what the actual statement is. Hope you're laughing. So what is the learning principle here? The brain learns best in context. We're here talking about teaching and learning and teachers and kids. And so when you see something now in this moment, of course, your brain goes immediately to the context that we're in. So that's just another sort of short example. And we have many, many, many more. I think that I'm probably coming to the end of our time, so I want to wrap up. But these are the kinds of things that, again, in longer courses, we can give you many, many, many more examples. So I am going to move through to right to the end of this. Okay. So here are the answers to the truths and myths. And I've just put the ones that are in green are true and the ones that are in red are myths. So it is true that visuals are better learning tools than words. And if all of these are tweaking your interest and you want to say, Bambi, let's do more, come to the course, because these are the things that we can unpack there. All right. We did this one. No, it cannot pay attention to more than one thing at a time. Does the brain involuntarily seeks connection to previous learning? That is absolutely true. We immediately go to what we already know about something when we get new input. Very interesting implication one, that we retain more of our learning for longer when we have access to that learning spaced over time. It's give up on feedback if you're not going to give the opportunity to kids to act on it. It's not even necessary to do it if you're not going to let them act on it. Brain learns best in context. We know this one, that every learner is unique and learns differently in a different pace, even though you'd never know it from the way our schools are set up. And then finally, the working memory can typically hold 9 to 10 pieces. No, it only holds about 7 or 8. That's why when you were doing the counting, you probably started to lose it around 7. That's even been revised down to between 5 and 8 or so. So why does all this matter? Great school leaders, and this is our 5th and final, they align the required instructional practice with learning principles, so that we don't allow ourselves to go into a learning situation and teach in ways that are not based on these learning principles. Here's some examples. So let's take this one. The brain involuntarily seeks connection to previous learning. An example of a required, it may be that you require pre-assessments to determine starting point. You as a leader can put that in there. Don't start anything new. Always pre-assess to find out the starting point of every student. Pre-assessment has dropped out to such a large degree in so many schools. And we have the learning science to support reverting to that practice. If let's take the one, feedback is only useful if the learner has the opportunity to act on it. Here's a couple of things that might operationalize that. One is, don't start unit 2 right after unit 1. Always insist that there are a couple of lessons after the end of a unit for students to be able to practice using the feedback that they got from, let's say, an assessment. And another one would be second opportunities on all assessments to, again, that you use the learning evidence for students to be able to use the feedback that they have received and act on it. And a third example, we know that everybody is unique and learns at a different pace, and we keep saying that to each other. And then we look at the practices and we don't see that we're reflective of that. So there's a few things that we can do even within the current structure. We can do flex times with students. We can allow them to show when they're ready to be assessed, rather than having report, the assessment task for everybody on the same day at the same time. That's not reflective of the fact that learners are unique, et cetera, et cetera. These are just a few examples. And again, together we can craft dozens of these to impact learning. Great school leaders don't allow neutral or harmful instruction practices, such as only one chance for a summative assessment. This is harmful. It flies in the face of the learning principles. They do not allow no opportunity on feedback. They do not use homework as an assessment. I know that's going to tweak your interest. We won't talk about it today. Come to the course. All right. They don't use grades to penalize students. And we don't pretend we know everything that there is to know about how children learn. So in summing up, what great leaders do to impact student learning, they operationalize with the 5 key questions. They align the curriculum. They adopt a systematic way of improving. They align required instructional practices with learning principles. And of course, the most critical one is that they ensure quality teaching for all students. And I want to thank you all for being here with us today. And we look forward to finding ways to engage with you again. Thank you all.
Bambi, thank you so very much. I was having profound flashbacks of the time that I spent with you and your team back when I was 30 years old. For those of you, I see that there's about 400 of us here on the screen. Much of what Bambi talked about is actually a 4-week long course that we develop aspirational leaders to take these 5 really deep principles of what we should be doing and what we should not be doing back to our schools to take us from good to great. So with that, what I would like to do is just take a few minutes to share with you some very exciting news that I alluded to earlier, that Bambi and the Principals Training Center is going to come to India. It's going to be hosted in the Geo Institute in Mumbai starting this year. So if I can ask Ritu to bring up a a PowerPoint just for some of you to take some slides and some screenshots if you would like to consider maybe signing up to take this very, very powerful and important course. I want to begin by going back to one of the first things that Bambi said. One of the first slides, and I am reading this, she said, there are literally there are no cases where a high impact school is being led by ineffective leaders. Basically, we know from the research that high impact schools are being led by highly skilled and enlightened leaders. So this brings me to a conversation that I've had with Dr. Pollack, Mr. Basu, of course, the Ambani family, and also the foundation people. As you know, the Geo Institute, the foundation, and of course, the Ambani family are deeply committed to education in India. They want to do everything within their power to enhance the impact of education on the young children in India. So for several years, we've been having a conversation about how best to do that. And at the end of the day, it's exactly as Bambi said. We have to upskill and enlighten educational leaders in India if we want schools and teachers to move in that direction. If we miss out on the leaders of schools, we're missing the whole game. And Bambi hit that early in her presentation. So to that end, with the Geo Institute and with the Reliance Foundation and with Mr. and Mrs. Ambani, we were thinking about how do we kickstart this sort of crusade in India about enhancing, upskilling, and enlightening educational leaders. And we decided we need to get the Principals Training Center and Bambi Betts to Mumbai now. So that's the plan. The PTC will be hosted in Mumbai. Ritu, you want to flip to the next slide? These slides have a lot of text on them. I'm not going to share all of the text, but I do want you to take a look at this. And it is going to start this year on May 22nd to May 28th. It's going to be a 5 days of instruction, a couple of days of travel focused on India and Southeast Asia. I'm sure we'll have people from all over the world as well coming to Mumbai. If our numbers are big and there's a huge demand for this, we might consider offering a second class this semester as well. There are 4 modules to complete the PTC. This will be module number 1. Next slide, Ritu. Okay, so the course content is literally built around these 5 pillars. You can see the foundations, school improvement, culture and climate, organizing learning, because that's what we do, is we are the gatekeepers of learning, and of course, human resources. Again, on that quiz that Bambi shared with you, I hope that most of us felt like the #1 impact was teacher performance. Because when it all boils down to it, schools are only as good as their teachers, and teachers can only grow and develop as much as their educational leaders allow them to. And therefore, the PTC will build those skills and enlighten those leaders to allow that to happen. So that's the content. So if you decide that this is the course for you, that's what you're going to be doing for 5 days. Next slide. Okay, the learning goals. I want you to just take a screenshot of this, reflect on this and say, okay, if those are the 5 pillars, by the end of the PTC with Bambi, what will our goal have been and how have I achieved that? And the most important, again, at the bottom here is to apply the understanding. So you go back to your schools. By the way, we're talking right now, if you're sitting here, if you're a teacher and you aspire to be a principal like I did 30 years ago, if you're a young associate principal or a PYP coordinator or an MYP coordinator or an athletic director, and this is something you aspire to, if you're a young principal, but also if you are a veteran educator that really wants to get recharged and refueled and redirected on how to enhance your school and your culture, come here. Because when you leave at the end of the week, you're going to be able to apply your understanding to systemic change in your school. Next slide. Course description again, just take a snapshot of that, go back to your head of school, go back to your principal, say, you know, the PTC is coming to India. we've in the past, we've had to fly ourselves to Miami or fly ourselves to Italy, and we've had all of those extra costs. Now with the Reliance Foundation, the Geo Institute, the PTC is coming to Mumbai. Let's get on a train, let's get on a bus, let's go to Mumbai, spend a week with Bambi and her team. This is what the course is going to be doing. Next slide. So who are we looking for? As you can imagine, we had over 1,000 registrations for Bambi's course just today. A couple of weeks ago when I had my master's course, we offered, again, over 1,000 people signed up for it. There is a hunger in the Indian educational leadership ecosystem for growth and development. We know that we are not where we should be, and we want to be where we need to be. But we cannot have 2,000 people in 1 week in the Geo Center doing the PTC. So the eligibility criteria is the applicant should have a minimum undergraduate qualification and should be working in a school, in a senior management or middle management position, okay? So we want to start there this year, see how it goes, look at the demand, figure out how we might better meet the demand. And the next slide, just to let you know, the duration is 7 full days, meaning 1 day of travel to get here, 1 day of travel to leave. We're going to put you up in the Geo Center in the residence that Ritu showed some pictures of earlier. Those are the dates. And if you are interested, starting in the next couple of days on the Geo Institute website, just type in Geo Institute, there will be registration links. Once the registration comes in, depending on the demand, myself and Bambi and our team at the Geo Institute will begin to select those people to be our first cohort of PTCers in India. And I think that's the last slide. Ritu, is that the last slide? It is.
Yes.
So with that, we're going to quickly close with 2 or 3 things. Number one, Bambi, thank you for today, giving us a bit of a taste of what's coming, but also for saying, yes, I will bring the PTC to India. India is a special place on the planet when it comes to school and to education. There's no country in the world that reveres education, growth, and development and student learning like we do in India. So thank you. I think you're going to have a great experience. Your team's going to love working with us, number one. Number two, for all of those that have continually come to these webinars, it always seems like we have about 400 to 600 people at these webinars. We're going to be offering one every single month. We're actually thinking in May of offering an extended master course that I will be teaching with a few of my colleagues over 3 to 5 hours to once again build momentum and get your neurons firing for what for the PTC. So we're going to be offering these for the rest of the year and into the 2024 school year. And so thank you for coming. I hope you find it valuable. Thank you for the team of the Geo Institute that does such a great job of organizing. Ritu, Dr. Pollack, Julie, Mr. Basu, and the rest of the team. Namaste from Kansas. Thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Craig, and thank you, Bambi. I think we have exactly 7 minutes remaining before we can close it, and I think we've received a couple of questions. So, Bambi, if you're okay with it, we could take a few questions, maybe 1 or 2 of them, and then we can probably close at them, and then I could email you the rest of the questions, and then we can maybe then send it out to the participants who asked this. So the first question, and there are a couple of questions, I'm just going to club them and ask you, is that, people are asking what's going to be the future of education and, the do's and don'ts and the learnings that you mentioned. How will they evolve, with the evolution in education? Say, for example, 20 years, down the line. What's going to really happen, and are we going to be completely offline, online, physical? So just trying to combine these questions and ask you. So what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. Well, if we had a crystal ball, we could say that. And having been in education now for a number of decades, it isn't the fastest moving human endeavor, but I think countries like India are really helping us to realize that we can fast forward with this, we can move it. We're starting to see some good movement in certain countries around the world that are going to that third mindset, which is that let's just stop for a minute and not think that it has to be the way it is. Not because we don't like it and it's not doing it, but let's just put that mindset aside. And so we're starting to see things like valuing learning that took place outside of school in the same way that we value it as if it took place inside of school. So there's an example in the United States called the mastery transcript, for example, where when a student finishes their secondary education, their transcript isn't just a set of courses or exams that they took, but it is representative of sort of 4 years of things that they did and learned and documented outside. So I think I really strongly feel like we're really on the cusp of dismantling this idea of the factory model of schooling. I think we're there. It's going to take really strong leaders who really quickly start to adopt some of the things that we know make the difference. So I think we will see that the formal kind of go to our place called school, where there's a classroom and there's a teacher in there, that will still be there, but it will be maybe 30% of what the educational landscape looks like. That's the best prediction I can come up with today.
Thank you. And yeah, I think we will just know when we reach there, what really happens. So my next question is, so of course, in India specifically, there are a lot of public schools and private schools and, across the world as well. But there is some amount of, like clear distinction between private and public here in India. So do you think your learnings and the leadership styles that we have kind of differ for public school leaders and for private school leaders? And how are, so the question is from a public school leader as to how can they kind of, at their school impart these learnings in their teachers and their leaders?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and one that we in our organization think about all the time. We originally set up to work with international schools, and we have since realized that some of the lessons that we've learned in those settings can also be extended into state and public schools. So we have other projects with other countries where we do have some evidence that it really is like all of leadership. What are the boxes that are constraining me, and where can I push back on those? So if you're a single leader in a single public school, that's a great conversation to have with yourself, and to sit down with the new plan, the NEP 2020, and say, okay, where does this give me leeway? In fact, when I was starting to think about putting today's masterclass together, that was kind of a question that I started with was, okay, I'm a leader in a public school, in a state school, and where do I have wiggle room? Where can I push the envelope? So I'd say that's the first conversation to start having and talking to your colleagues about what is possible. And don't accept no right off the bat, because there's a new plan, and the new plan has a way broader, my sense is that it has a much broader scope in terms of agency, both for leaders and teachers, than perhaps the past. I'm not so familiar with the past plans as I am with this one, but it's definitely built around the idea that there needs to be flexibility. And so things that work, most of the things that we looked at today are doable in a private or a public setting. They're not bound to one or the other. And in fact, in planning, we're really careful to realize that, it's knowing your boundaries, knowing what parts of the curriculum can you change, what kinds of teaching practices are required. Okay, we've got to do those, but that doesn't mean that we can't also do the things that are within our control that we can do. You can set up very rigorously required teaching and assessment practices that will easily fall within the guidelines of NEP 2020. They've got all that stuff in there. So they've actually handed it to you, I think, and said, hey, now start making people actually do it. It's not just an idea, and there's no restrictions, or very few restrictions that I could see in it.
That helps. Thank you. And I think the last question that we can quickly take today is, so I think Craig started his introduction by saying that 30 years down the line, he had this question, and that's how he decided to join PDC. So question really says that what's the ideal time for any teacher to kind of start training themselves to become like a leader? What's the ideal time or in their career trajectory that that they should take this step towards start working on them to become like a leader or take a leadership position?
Yeah, for me, I would say that it's nice to do them simultaneously if you can. I think back on my own teacher training and how much of it had I been taught the perspective of leadership at the same time that I'm learning how to teach. Because really, as a leader in a school, what are you doing? It's what we talked about. You're shepherding what kids are going to learn, how they're going to learn, how they're going to be assessed, etc. So it's just at the leadership level, you're putting in policy and required practice that we can then help people to achieve. So, it's a good question, but I don't think it's linear. I just think that, there are opportunities for leadership all along the way. One of our large programs is teacher leaders, because so many of the critical decisions get made in the history department or across year 2 group or wherever those, whatever the groupings are. So there's a lot of power in understanding leadership at the teacher leader level. You don't do it in the same scope. You don't do it across the system, but you do it within your system. So I would say have an eye on it and take teacher leadership courses right from the beginning when you're planning to be a teacher, so that you understand the relationship, because those people are going to make you do things. Those leaders are going to make you do things. You might as well start from the beginning, understanding the why.
Super. Thank you so much, Bambi. I think that was a really interesting masterclass and an interesting Q&A session. And I think just certain more questions that we have, we could probably email them to you, and then we could probably post it on our social media as well for people to kind of, come and see. And once again, I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today for this masterclass. Thank you so much for taking out the time. We really appreciate it, and be rest assured there are a lot of such masterclasses planned in the future. And of course, the training, which is scheduled in May. We encourage you to spread the word. Anybody who feels, will benefit from this program, please tell them. And we'll be very, very excited to host you all here at Geo Institute. Once again, I thank Bambi, I thank Craig, Mr. Basu, Mr. Joy. Thank you, everyone, for such a great masterclass. Hope you all have a lovely day, evening, night, from wherever or whichever part of the country or the world that you've joined us today. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you, Ritu. Thank you, Craig. Everyone.